In this module, we're going to see how to develop against the new user interface platforms provided by SharePoint 2010. Now, one of these platforms is the server ribbon, and the ribbon is fixed at the top of your SharePoint pages and supplies context-sensitive commands to the user. Now, it's a very familiar interface to information workers because it's a similar concept to the ribbon in Microsoft Office client applications. The ribbon technology itself is actually built on AJAX, or asynchronous JavaScript and XML, but can include CSS layouts, styling and hover effects. It also takes care automatically of dynamic scaling, so when you resize your browser window or view the site in a different screen resolution, the ribbon continues to look professional and useful and responsive to the user at the top of the page. Now, as a developer, you can create controls and add them to the ribbon. You can modify and remove existing controls, and the approach to do this is fairly straightforward using Visual Studio 2010. You can create a ribbon XML elements file and use that to define your ribbon actions and its images. So here we have a help button that I've added to the document library section of the ribbon. And here's the markup, so it's not a huge amount of effort. We will see something similar to this in one of the demos. But for example, you can see the image 32 by 32 attribute there, pointing to my own help icon. And our action is to open up a window with a suitable help page. In a very similar way, we can modify the Site Actions menu. So there we have a Manage Solutions item at the bottom. And this is an example of an XML file to achieve just that. So this is really simple. We have a URL action that points to an administrative page in our SharePoint file system. And again, you will see this in the demos in this module. The dialog platform is also a new concept, and we should have a quick overview before we start coding with it. The idea is to provide client-side dialogues that are modal, but that fit in with the style of a SharePoint page. So the user can interact with either our own functionality or SharePoint's without having to perform many round trips to the server. You can maximize the size of the dialog, but it's really a div control that's embedded in the SharePoint page. And the technology for creating this includes the JavaScript client object model, controls, div elements, and so on. And as a developer, you can even pass parameters to the window. So although it's not a real Internet Explorer window, it behaves and appears like that to the end user, and it's very efficient. You will see how to create these dialogues in this module as well. So as a developer, you can create your own dialogues, and you can do this in design time in Visual Studio. But in terms of extensibility, you can also create dialogues on the fly from your own code, because effectively what we're doing is writing JavaScript and HTML elements. So you can do that very easily in your own server-side code. You can also control where the dialogue appears. And here's an example of a very simple dialogue that contains a text box and a button. These are client-side objects, and here's an example of the user control. In fact, a visual web parts that I created to achieve this dialogue. It's really very simple. We have HTML at the top for the hyperlink called change site title, and there we have the div that defines the dialogue. To start with, its display attribute or its display style is set to none, so normally it's hidden on the page. We then have some JavaScript for showing that dialogue and interacting with the controls in that div, or in the dialogue as we should think of it now, and we will see how to do this in the final demo for this module. But it's a relatively straightforward task. Also note that our JavaScript interacts with the client object model. For example, we would need to load the web object in order to change its title. So we have client context objects, and we use execute query async methods, like you've seen in previous modules. So this is a client-side piece of script and an HTML div that interacts with the client object model and also uses the dialog platform for showing this div as a modal dialog.